Hunting the Bismarck by C.S. Forester. This is a story of desperate chances and of the highest professional skills, of a gamble for the domination of the world in which human lives were the stakes on the green gaming table of the ocean. It is the story of a pursuit without precedent in the history of navies. For 6 days it lasted, days of unrelenting storm, of tossing grey seas and lowering clouds, without a single gleam of sunshine to lighten the setting of the background of tragedy. Those actors in the tragedy who played their parts at sea did so to the unceasing accompaniment of shrieking wind, leaping waves, flying spray, and bitter cold. And all this took place at the time when England stood alone, almost ringed in by enemies of unbelievable power and malignity. The world's newspapers were pouring from the presses with headlines telling of disasters yesterday and predicting new disasters tomorrow. Britain's last ally conquered. Greece overrun, said one headline. Attack launched on Crete, said another. Yugoslavia overwhelmed. British in full retreat in North Africa. Rommel advances. Will Hitler move into Spain next? German submarines claim huge successes in Atlantic. Scharnhorst and Eisenhower awaiting their moment in Brest. Blitz again rocks England. And each succeeding map that the daily papers carried showed how the black stain of Nazi conquest was spreading over frontier after frontier. Now, at this moment, when Britain's resources and will to survive were being strained to the utmost, preparations were being made to strike another blow against her lifelines. The German battleship Bismarck was making ready in a Polish harbor to proceed to sea after a prolonged period of training and working up in the Baltic. The largest, the most dangerous, the most modern ship of war yet launched, Bismarck was completing her stores, cramming herself as full as her storerooms and her shell rooms and her bunkers would hold. There was meat for her refrigerators and flour and vegetables for her food lockers, oil for her bunkers, fresh water for her tanks, and, above all, shells for her magazines. A long train of trucks moved alongside the ship, each laden with a monstrous 15-inch shells, 3/4 of a ton each, deadly even in appearance, for the ship's crane to lift and swing into the air, down, 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 through deck after deck, into the shell rooms far below waterline. The officer on the deck supervising the loading of the ammunition shouted, "Last one!" "Last one," echoed the officer on the deck, waving one finger in reply to the finger waved to him. The last shell, grim and ugly, swung up in the crane to make it descend into the shell room. The busy gangs of workers on the dockside melted away. The band, still playing, marched off towards the gate, its music dying away slowly. Only a contingent of new sailors standing in formation by the lines remained. Admiral Lütjens, brisk, efficient, and active, came out of his sea cabin and made his way to the loudspeaker on the bridge. "Gentlemen," he began his speech, but the young officer stiffened to attention to hear him. The words he uttered were carried through the ship by the public address system. He welcomed the young officers aboard, and he explained to them that they had been expressly detailed by the highest authority to make this voyage, so that on their return they would disseminate through the Navy the details of the triumphs they had witnessed. They were in the newest and most powerful battleship afloat, and they were going to experience high adventure. There was no ship in the British Navy that could face them in single combat. There was no large ship that could escape them. 4 months of harsh training in the Baltic had made the Bismarck the most efficient ship in the world. Did British convoys cover the Atlantic? Bismarck could make short work of convoys and escorts, with the aid of Prince Eugen, accompanying them on this voyage of honor. The Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary, the pride of Britain, were crossing the Atlantic over and over again without escort, relying on their speed. Bismarck was faster than they. What would the world say when the news came of the sinking of the Queen Mary, with 10,000 troops on board? 1 or 2 blows like that, and England would not dare to send a merchant ship to sea. For as long as Bismarck was in the Atlantic, England's commerce would be disrupted, and the British people, shattered and shaken, already by the Blitz, would starve. He himself had already ranged the whole length of the Atlantic in command of the battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, and had sunk 250,000 tons of British shipping. 250,000 tons. Now they could set themselves a target of 2 million tons, dealing a blow from which England could never recover. Down on the dockside, one last worker was lingering over some remains of his job, half hidden by piles of stores. The sound of the speech conveyed over the loudspeaker just reached his ears. He heard those words about the Atlantic, about the Queen Mary, and with the last words of the speech he sauntered down the rock with every appearance of innocence. His papers were quite in order as he showed them to the police. Already sailors at the lines were singling up and then casting off. Bismarck swung herself about and headed out to sea. The dockyard workers massed at the gate, watched her go, and the band played. At a small port in Sweden, a long pier ran out to sea, and on it someone in civilian clothes was quietly fishing. He was surrounded by proof of how closely Sweden guarded her neutrality, how much she feared a surprise attack. Swedish soldiers, Swedish Coast Guardsmen, were constantly patrolling and gazing out to sea. He sat there endlessly, leisurely eating his lunch, changing his bait, and occasionally securing a fish. The sun was setting and the northern day nearly at an end when, looking southward, he saw something silhouetted against the remaining glow of the sky. He had binoculars hanging round his neck. He whipped them to his eyes, gazed long and carefully, rested his eyes and gazed again. There was no mistaking what he saw. Two almost identical silhouettes, one large and one small, the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen, with a crowd of merchant ships, 11 all told, accompanying them. He dismantled his fishing rod, picked up his gear, and hurried shoreward along the pier, through the Swedish guards, into the main street, past the post office. It was into that post office a few minutes later that an elderly Englishman came striding. He filled out a telegraph form with a few rapid words and handed it over to the counter. The girl there read the address and summoned a waiting Swedish policeman with her eyes. He came up and began questioning. The address was that of a London company in Cheapside. The message said, "Pit props and battens rising. 11 points at least." That was all. "What is this firm?" asked the policeman. "Timber importers. Everyone knows them." "What does this message say?" The Englishman satisfied his questioner and showed his papers, and a nod from the policeman allowed the message to be sent with a small apology. Our country has to make sure her neutrality is not violated, you understand, sir. In a London telegraph office, the keys began to chatter as a message came through. A girl dealt with it in the ordinary routine manner, but a supervisor noticed the address. "Just a minute," she said, with a hurried reference to a file. A moment later, a motorcyclist was roaring through the blitzed streets of London. He dismounted at the Admiralty and delivered the message. It passed rapidly from hand to hand until it reached a rear admiral. The clock showed 8 o'clock in the morning. The calendar showed May the 21st, 1941. There it was. Pit props and battens rising. He looked at the chart of the Baltic beside him on the wall, identified the town of origin, Malmo, and flipped through a code book. "Well," he said to a colleague, "Bismarck's on the move." "She's been exercising in the Baltic for 4 months," said his colleague. "It's about time we heard from her." "Prince Eugen's with her," said the Rear Admiral, still referring to his list. "And 11 merchant ships. Could be something very big indeed. I'll take it to the Admiral right away." The Admiral was in the war room when the Rear Admiral found him. He heard the news and began to comment on it, moving his pencil slowly from point to point over the chart. Bismarck moving. It could have happened at a worse moment, I suppose, but not much. But the enemy never troubles to consult us as to what would be a convenient time for us, somehow. You know, the attack on Crete has begun. Cunningham has all he can do in the eastern Mediterranean. Somerville at Gibraltar has his hands full, too. The Scharnhorst and Gneisenau are at Brest. We have to watch for their breakout at any moment. There are convoys here, 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 and all over the Atlantic. Prince of Wales hasn't finished her training yet, not by a long shot. You can't call her a fighting ship by any means. Same with Victorious. Now, supposing Bismarck is going to break out into the Atlantic, Which route? Pentland Firth? Fair Isle? East of the Faroes? West of the Faroes? Denmark Strait? Which? 1,000 miles of water to guard, and precious few ships to do it with. And not one as dangerous as the Bismarck, sir, said the Rear Admiral. That's something I don't need reminding about. The Admiral led the way into his own office. Put Coastal Command to work. I want air reconnaissance of the Norwegian coast. I want photographs. That telegram's 8 hours old now. She could be, he said, glancing over the chart, anywhere from Bergen southward. I want photographs of anything suspicious from Bergen, Oslo Fjord, and south from there. It was 9 o'clock when the reconnaissance Spitfires roared off on their mission, searching the whole tangled coast of southern Norway. The pilot of one of them thought he saw something in Grimstad Fjord south of Bergen. Circled, made sure of what he was looking at, and photographed it. He noted the time on his wristwatch, 1:15. Then he headed for home. On board the Bismarck, they had seen his coming on their radar and had turned out to man the guns. The young supernumerary officers eagerly standing to see the action, but there was only time to recognize the type. Spitfire! Before she was gone again. The pilot landed, climbed out of his plane. 2 cruisers in Grimstad Fjord were his first words to the eager people who greeted him. They seized his camera and hastened off with it. Steady hands took out the film, developed it, printed it, and enlarged the prints, with the hands of the clock creeping along all the time. He had landed at 2:45. It was 3:15 by the time the enlargements were in the hands of experts. Not 2 cruisers, said one of them. That's the Bismarck and the Prince Jürgen. Telephones began to buzz. Bismarck and Grimstad Fjord. Someone in the Admiralty received the news. His clock showed 3:45. We've been lucky, he said. We saw her off Sweden, and now we've found her in Norway. We'll have bombers over her by 6 o'clock. Lucky, said the man he addressed. Look at this. It was a meteorological report from the Orkneys to the effect that mist and rain are closing in and visibility deteriorating rapidly. By 6 o'clock, it'll be all shut down. The planes will never find her. Don't you ever say we're lucky again? That's the unluckiest thing to say there ever was. Lucky. So it was to prove. The RAF reports began to come in as the hands of the clock turned on to midnight and beyond. But someone tore off the sheet showing May the 21st on the calendar to reveal May the 22nd. No luck. No luck. Cloud down to 200 feet. Visibility nil. Couldn't see a thing, said exhausted RAF pilots. On board the Bismarck, it was midnight. A German naval officer came into the day cabin of Admiral Lütjens. The Admiral was dozing in an armchair, his head propped on his hand. Meteorological forecast, sir, said the officer. Lütjens was immediately awake. Call the captain, he said, after a glance at the paper. And then, on the captain's arrival, here's the forecast. 2 days of thick weather at least. Now's the time to move. I want to be out of here in 10 minutes. Aye, aye, sir, said the captain. Bismarck was in the second degree of readiness with the ack guns manned. In the hardly relieved darkness on deck could just be seen the men at their stations with the mist swirling round them in wreaths. Below decks, half the ship's company was sleeping, or trying to, when at this moment the loudspeaker began to blare, giving orders for the anchor parties to go to their stations and all hands to their posts. There was immediate orderly bustle as the men tumbled out, the supernumerary officers in a state of great excitement. A shaded lamp was flicking a message to the Jugend. There was an acknowledgement. The captains began to turn. The dripping cables came in link by link. Messages passed back and forward from forecastle to bridge. The engines began to turn. The propellers turned with them, and the huge ship gradually got underway and moved ponderously along through the swirling mist. Meanwhile, in the misty darkness of Scapa Flow, at the extreme north of Scotland, signal lamps of the home fleet began to flicker, calling and answering. There was a clatter of boots on still decks, a squawking of telephones in the darkness, a voice into a speaking tube. Captain, sir, signal from the flag. Down below on the mess decks, the loudspeaker shrilled with the noise of the pipe of the boatswain's mate. Call the port watch. Cable party muster on the forecastle in 10 minutes. Call the watch. The immense mess deck was packed full of hammocks slung at every possible point, out of which men began to slide sleepily. What's the flap about? Asked someone. Just call up the Admiral and ask him, said someone else. I've got to go and get that anchor up. How big keeps bound for you, said another. The man he was addressing was putting on sea boots and reaching for his oilskins among the tremendous jam of belongings packed everywhere, illustrating the extreme crowding in which the men lived. What are you dressing up for, Nobby? Asked someone. Didn't your invite say evening dress optional? He thinks he's on the sunny Riviera, said another. Nobby was now in sea boots and oilskins. Make way for a man who's got a man's work to do, he said, pushing through the crowd. He went clattering forward through the vast ship, along alleyways and up ladders with methodical bustle all around him. He emerged from the bright lights onto the forecastle in the darkness there. Other oilskins gleamed faintly. Rain was driving across the forecastle, and a wind was persistently wailing as they went about their business of weighing anchor. Down in a dark cabin, a telephone squawked. And although a light was instantly turned on, it squawked again before the tousled man in the bunk reached for it. Commander E. Steam in 10 minutes, sir, squawked the telephone. Right, I'm coming, said the engineer commander, plunging out of bed and reaching for his uniform. It was an exact repetition of what was going on in the Bismarck at that very moment. The clocks in the two brightly lit engine rooms exactly coincided at 20 minutes past midnight. Capstan turned. The cable came in, link by link. The messages passed back and forth. The valves were opened to admit steam to the turbines. The propellers began to revolve in the dark water, and the ship, with signals still flashing from her shaded lamps, began slowly to move out of Scapa Flow through the outer submarine defenses. Might have been the Bismarck all over again, except that the faint light illuminated the name Hood upon her stern. So at the same moment the two ships set out, Bismarck reaching far into the north to pass round Iceland, Hood, with the Prince of Wales following her, ploughing along on a more southerly course, in order to intercept Bismarck in Denmark Strait if she were heading that way. And the moment Prince of Wales left the sheltered waters of Scapa Flow, the storm awaited her. Up rose her bows and then down again, up and down, as the spray flew in great sheets aft to the bridge. Bismarck was meeting the same conditions, or worse. She was ploughing over mountains of ice, grey water, lifting and heaving. Moreover, now she was at sea, and at sea every man's hand was against her. There was no chance of her meeting a friend, and there was every chance of her meeting an enemy. Admiral Lutyens and Captain Lindemann were discussing this very point over cigars in the captain's sea cabin immediately under the bridge, which was heaving and swaying with the ship's motion. But as far as the enemy knows, sir, said Lindemann, we are still in Grimstead Fjord. They have no certain knowledge that we are at sea, and if they had, they'd have no means of guessing what course we're steering. My dear Lindemann, look at the other side of the matter. The sea is theirs, all theirs. We are furtive trespassers at present. Even if we are destined to reverse that state of affairs in a few more months, how can you be sure that a British ship of war won't appear under our bows at any moment? Now, this minute, or in 5 minutes' time. We must be ready at any moment to blow any enemy out of the water before he has the chance to inflict any injury on us. But we're going to be at sea a long time, said Lindemann. After a few days, the men will be worn out. After a few days, we may be able to relax. Meanwhile, my order stands. Every man at his station. Half of them can sleep, but let no man leave his post. Very well, Admiral. So, that was the situation in the Bismarck. In the crowded turrets, down in the shell rooms and handling rooms, in the engine rooms and boiler rooms, the whole ship's complement was present. Half the men attended to their duty, the other half rested how and where they could. Lucky ones could lie down, often curling themselves perforce round projections in the decks. Others sat leaning against bulkheads, swaying with the motion of the ship, and being jerked back into wakefulness by an unexpected heave. "'Tis part of the price we pay for not being masters of the sea, Captain," said Lutyens. "We can remember that when the time comes when England asks for peace." "I understand, sir," said Lindemann. In order to change the subject, he asked a question into a voice pipe and listened to the answer, which he relayed to Lutyens. Visibility considerably less than 1 mile, Admiral. Even stronger words were being used in the Admiralty, where an officer was reporting to an admiral. Visibility absolutely nil, sir. Not a hope of seeing anything in Grimstad Fjord. Said the Admiral. She was sighted at 1 p.m. yesterday. Now it's, he looked at clock and calendar, 12 noon, 23 hours. What's her farthest on? The officer swung his dividers in a wide arc centering on Grimstad. That's it, sir, at 25 knots. Say, 600 miles. She could be anywhere within that circle. Or she could still be in Grimstad, where we make fools of ourselves. Ask Coastal Command to try again. It was 7:15 when the message reached the war room. Bismarck not in sight in Grimstad Fjord or in Bergen. So the bird's flown, said the Admiral. 30 hours since the last sighting. What's their farthest on now? The officer drew a much larger arc on the chart. 750 miles, sir. There it is. Just as well Hood left last night, was the Admiral's comment. Bismarck might be here, or here. He drew with his pencil a series of possible courses for the Bismarck, in each case ending the line at the outer circle. Or she might, for that matter, be here, back in the Baltic, heading for the Kiel Canal. In that case, we'll have burned up 40,000 tons of oil for nothing. 40,000 tons. More like 60,000. And we'll have given 20,000 men a free trip to sea. That is, if the rest of the home fleet leaves Scapa Flow and is beginning to look as if it should. There are so many exits to guard against, apart from Denmark Strait. It was while the Admiral was speaking that the home fleet was making preparation to go to sea. And at the same time, Lutyens and Lindemann and various staff officers were gathered in the operations room in Bismarck. On the chart table before them lay a chart of the northern waters with Bismarck's track up to now marked upon it. I still fail to see the need to go as far as Denmark Strait, said Lindemann. The other passages through to the Atlantic are nearer and far wider. Visibility is still bad, sir, added a staff officer. Our U-boat's last report on the Denmark Straits, Lindemann went on, says the ice from Greenland stretches to within 60 miles of Iceland. In addition, there are the minefields on the other side, leaving us a passage only 20 miles wide. Now, one cruiser can watch a 20-mile channel, even in thick weather. The British will never reach Denmark Strait in time, said Lutyens. They could intercept us if we go by the Faroes. So, it is my order that we head for Denmark Strait. We may meet a cruiser, but we'll brush her aside. Very well, sir. HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk were patrolling in Denmark Strait. By the invisible sun, it was late afternoon. The westerly sky was already faintly pink in the thin mist. It was an utterly dreary scene. To the west, lay the ice, humped and jagged as far as the eye could see. To the east, there was fog, impenetrable to the eye. A perpetual cold wind was shrieking along the deck, and the ships were rolling deeply in the heavy sea. The lookouts sat at their posts, binoculars to their eyes, all round the bridge, sweeping steadily from side to side, and then up and down, turning back and forward in their swivel chairs. Other groups of muffled-up men stood seeking what little shelter there was beside the ack-ack guns, occasional sheets of spray sweeping the decks as the ship put her shoulder into a wave, adding to their discomfort. In the war room, things were comparatively quiet. Only the minimum of messages was coming through. There was no bustle or excitement. The Rear Admiral was entertaining an air of Vice Marshal, a big beefy man with an Air Force moustache. He had a black crayon in his hand, and he began making sweeping lines on the chart with it. Here are two possible courses for the Bismarck, perhaps the most likely ones. Hood and Prince of Wales sailed from Scapa Flow 2 nights ago. 43 hours ago. They'll be somewhere here. Can't you be sure? No. They're maintaining wireless silence. So is Bismarck, as you can guess. We've cruisers trying to watch the gaps as well as they can in the thick weather. Arethusa and Manchester are here, between the Faroes and Iceland, and Suffolk and Norfolk here, in the Denmark Strait. You can see for yourself why we've been screaming for air patrols. Visibility is still nil, I'm afraid, answered the Air Vice Marshal. In the war room, a junior officer turned to the Rear Admiral. Most immediate message coming through, sir. Let's have it. The message came rattling through down the tube. It seemed hours as the officer fumbled it open. Hours more as the Rear Admiral read it. It's all right, he said. They found her. Suffolk is shadowing her in Denmark Strait. Latitude, longitude, here. He pointed on the map. Somebody gave a cheer. Every face was smiling. So that's it, said the Air Vice Marshal, pointing with his stick to one of the alternative courses for Hood. Hood will meet the Bismarck, here. Yes, said the Rear Admiral. There's a Mulgrave and the others. What's worrying you? Asked the Air Vice Marshal. Things can still go wrong. Hood's an old lady now, a very old lady. She's 20 years older than Bismarck. Do you remember the plains of 1920, sir? How would you like to fight a new Messerschmitt in a Farman biplane? But there's this other one. What's her name? Prince of Wales. And she's too young, sir. No time to work up the ship's company. No time to cure her teething troubles. She hadn't been completed a month. You might say she's still in the builder's hands. I know she's gone to sea with the contractor's workmen still on board. Well, it'll be an experience for them. They'll be fighting a battle in their little bowler hats. The officer receiving messages came with another. Position, course, and speed, sir, he said. The Admiral turned to the Air Vice Marshal. Get your chaps to do all they can to cover the strait, he said. Yes, sir, said the Air Vice Marshal. Visibility is still bad, sir. I know. But now you can explain to them how urgent it is. You're up to date on the situation? Somewhere, here, about dawn, tomorrow. The Admiral indicated a spot on the chart to the south of Denmark Strait. In the operations room of the Hood, the Admiral and his staff were bent over a similar chart. Someone was working on it with ruler and dividers. The intercepting course is 310 degrees, sir, said the navigating officer. You can expect contact any time after 0200. I don't want to engage until daylight. Give me a course and speed to intercept an hour before sunrise. Ruler and dividers went to work again. One line went to meet another. At 27 knots, sir, course 295 degrees, we shall meet at dawn. Here. The pencil made a black cross, a significant mark on the chart where the two lines met. Very well. You can inform the ship's company captain. And he turned to the chief of staff. Pass all this news on to Prince of Wales. At a gesture from the captain, the boatswain's mate outside the operations room shrilled with his pipe into the loudspeaker, and the captain began to speak. Down in the crowded mess deck, the watch below were taking their ease as well as they could. I don't know where we're going to, but we're going on our way, said someone. All the hanging garments down there were swaying rhythmically to and fro with the movement of the ship. You always want to know where you're going, Nobby, said someone. Can't you ever be satisfied? I know where we're not going, said someone else, and that's south. Who'd like a spell of the tropics, It's snowing outside, they tell me. Who wouldn't sell a farm and go to sea? This is when they heard the boatswain's mate's pipe and the captain's voice. Captain speaking. The Bismarck has been spotted. Suffolk shadowing her, and we're steaming to intercept. If everything goes according to plan, we'll be in touch with her at dawn tomorrow. I don't have to say that I hope we'll make short work of her, with the help of Prince of Wales. Let every man remember his duty. You'll be going to action station soon after midnight. Meanwhile, I want the watch below to get all the rest they can. Now, in case I don't have another chance to speak to you, good luck to us all.